So I'm really excited to show you the Reversible Mock Rib Vest. We've got two garments here. They're exactly the same pattern, but they're knitted in different yarn. On the mannequin here, we've got a fingering weight linen quill, which is held together with a lace weight silk mohair, a Pearl Soho's tussock yarn. And then I am wearing the second version, which is knitted in a DK weight yarn. Again, this is by Pearl Soho, and it's knitted in plain air. It's knitted top down. There's absolutely no seams, so we start off with a Turkish cast on, and that means you don't get any seam whatsoever. It's knitted top down with increases along the neckline and the armhole. There's a beautiful wide armhole, so you can wear mega statement sleeves. And the one side of the fabric features the mock rib, while the other side features a fabric that has more of a woven texture. So we're now swatching, and essentially the mock rib is a 2-row repeat. For the purposes of the pattern, I've called this side the right side, and that's the side where you see the vertical columns of knit stitches clearly. And then the reverse of the fabric has more of a woven appearance with floats going across every second row. And this is called the wrong side for the pattern. So for the swatch, the pattern is essentially a 2-row repeat. And we're going to start with the first row. Now, the stitch at the beginning and the end of the row form what we call the selvage stitch, and these are worked differently than the remainder of the row. So to create a selvage stitch, we always slip the first stitch and work the last stitch. When we slip the stitch, we'll be slipping it purlwise, which means we pass our needle from the back of our work through the stitch to the front and slip it off the needle. It's important to do it purlwise because this helps the selvage stitch to sit on this side of the fabric consistently. Then for the remainder of the row, we'll be knit 1, purl 1. So knit the first stitch, bring the yarn through to the front, purl the second stitch. And repeat all along the row, ending with a knit stitch. Knit, purl. So I've got 2 more stitches to go. I'm going to knit the last stitch in the sequence, and then I'm going to work my selvage stitch. So on this side, which is the right side, we'll be knitting that stitch. And we turn our work and work the second row. For the second row, we'll slip the selvage stitch purlwise, and then we begin our sequence, which is purl 1 and slip 1 purlwise with the yarn in front. So we bring our needle through the stitch from the back to front, that's purlwise, and slip it with the yarn at the front of our work, not at the back of our work. So slip 1 purlwise with the yarn in front. And we'll repeat that all along the row, finishing with a purl stitch. So purl 1, slip 1 purlwise with the yarn in front. We've got to the last 2 stitches, we purl the last of the pattern stitches, and then we'll work the selvage stitch. So this is a wrong side, it will be a purl stitch. I just want to show you how I block my swatch. I've soaked my swatch in water for a good 20 minutes now. I've got a towel here and I'm just going to roll up the towel and then just give the towel a squeeze just to get rid of the extra water. Get rid of the towel. And then I'm just going to place my swatch down. I'm not going to stretch it out, just let it kind of relax into position, and then I'll just place a couple of pins just to keep it in a nice square or rectangular shape. And then I'll let it dry completely, which will take it overnight really, and then I'll unpin it, just let it sit for a day, and then we'll measure our swatch. To count your gauge, first we're going to measure out the number of stitches over 10 centimeters or 4 inches. Place your ruler at the beginning of a knit column, so here's a knit column here, and then just count along. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 71, 22, 22 and a half I get. We were aiming for a stitch gauge of 23, so that's pretty close. To count your row gauge, I suggest you turn the swatch over because it's much easier. I place my ruler at the very beginning of a knit stitch, which sits just above a float. Just place that down. So here's a float going across here, and then just above that is a knit stitch. Every float represents 2 stitches because you've got a knit stitch and then a slipped stitch. So just counting upwards, 2, 4, 6. To count your row gauge, turn your swatch over, place your ruler at the beginning of a knit stitch, which sits just above the float. Every float represents 2 stitches. So just counting upwards, 2, 4, 6, 30, 32, 34, 36, 37 I get. We were aiming for a row gauge of 36 rows, so that's pretty close. We're going to start our vest with the Turkish cast on using our long circular needle in the size that we got gauge on. For a Turkish cast on, we'll start by making a slip knot. So just wrap your yarn over each other like so to create a loop. Put your fingers through the loop and grab the yarn while holding both of those tails, and place the slip knot on your lower needle. Then we're going to hold both of the needles together and just wrap the yarn around to create a loop which goes around both of those needles. So don't use your short tail, use the ball yarn. So I'm going to cast on 23 stitches, so I need to wrap the yarn around both needles 23 times. 1, 2, and we'll just make sure there's no gap between those needles. 3, 4, 5. So I've wrapped the yarn around my needle 23 times. Now I'm just going to keep the yarn against the top needle with my index finger. I'm going to pull the lower needle out so that the lower stitches remain on the cable. Then I'm going to start working across, and at the same time I'm going to be working in short rows. Just zoom in a little bit closer here. So I'll start by knitting the first stitch, and then I'm going to knit one, purl one twice. Knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one. Okay. Now we're going to turn our work. So we'll turn it so that it's facing this way now. And we're going to create a double stitch. So to do that, make sure that your yarn is in the front. Give it a nice tight pull. And then we're going to slip it onto the right hand needle. The first stitch on our left hand needle goes to our right hand needle, and then we're just going to pull our yarn over the needle, and what that does is it elevates the leg from the stitch below. So pull it right over, nice and tight, like so, and then we are going to bring our yarn between the needles through to the front. Going to purl one, slip one purlwise with the yarn in front, purl one, and then we purl the last stitch. Like so. We've just created our first short row. Now we'll turn the work again. So we're going to start our next row, which is a right side row, and it says to work and pattern to the double stitch. So we're going to slip one purlwise because it's our selvage stitch. Then we're going to knit one, purl one, until we get to the double stitch. Knit one, and this is our double stitch here, and you can see it looks a little bit funny. It's got one stitch here, and then it's also got the second leg here. So we're going to purl our double stitch, and we do that by passing our needle through under both of those legs, like so. Purl, and then we're going to knit one, purl one twice again. So knit one, purl one, knit one, purl one. Then we're going to turn our work and create a double stitch. So we bring the yarn through to the front, slip the stitch purlwise, and pull the yarn over so that the leg from the stitch below is being pulled over the needle. Bring our yarn through to the front and work back along the row in pattern. So we're going to purl one, slip one purlwise, purl one, slip one purlwise, purl one, slip one purlwise, and then we purl the last two stitches 1, 2. Turn our work again. Just wind off a bit more yarn. So you can see we're starting to get some short rows, but still maintaining our pattern along the rows. Your pattern will tell you how many times to repeat the last 2 rows. So this is what my work is looking like, having repeated those last 2 rows. You can see how I'm still just working off the one circular needle. And now we're going to continue working short rows, but they'll be slightly shorter. Slip 1 purlwise, going to knit 1, purl 1 until we get to the double stitch. We'll work our double stitch, placing our needle under both legs. So that's a purl stitch, and now we just knit 1, purl 1 once. Knit 1, purl 1. For this shoulder, the turn always occurs on a purl stitch, and that is so the first stitch in your sequence back is a purl stitch. So we'll create our double stitch, bring our yarn to the front, purl, slip 1 purlwise. So I'm going to complete the short rows and then I'll see you back here. So I've worked my last short row. You can see the double stitch here. I just want to point out the slip knot, which you can see here on this lower cable, is not a stitch. We'll get rid of the slip knot later after we've picked up our stitches for the back. So now we're just going to work across the row in pattern, picking up our last double stitch as we go. Picking up the last double stitch and then just working our last 2 stitches in pattern. So we're going to knit the last stitch, which is our selvage stitch. Turn our work. Now we're going to slip the first stitch purlwise because it's our selvage stitch, and we're going to work in pattern across the entire row, starting with purl 1, slip 1 purlwise. Now we'll turn our work. At this point, I'm just going to slip my stitches that are on hold, that have been sitting on the cable. I'm just going to slip them onto a needle holder just to make it a little bit easier to work the rest of the front. So we'll just slide those stitches back onto the needle and then thread them onto my needle holder. I'm just going to slip the slip knot onto the needle as well. Our next row is an increase row. What we are going to do is work the first 6 stitches in pattern. And then in the next stitch, which is a purl stitch, we're going to do a 2-stitch increase. This increase is going to be a neckline increase, and then at the end of the row, 2, 4, 6, 7, and this purl stitch here, we'll be doing an armhole increase also. So let's work the first 6 stitches. Just bring you a bit closer. Going to slip 1 purlwise, knit 1, have a bit more yarn. Purl one, knit one, purl one, knit one, 2, 4, 6. Now we're going to do an increase in the next purl stitch. So to do that, we'll purl the stitch as usual, but don't slide the stitch off the needle. Now we're going to bring our yarn through to the back and we're going to knit in the stitch below. So I'll just show you that again, maybe a little bit closer. Going to bring the needle through into the stitch below. Knit that, again not sliding the stitch off the needle, and then we're going to purl the stitch that's on our needle. Okay, now we'll continue in pattern until we get to the last 7 stitches. So now we're going to do the same thing in this purl stitch. Going to purl the stitch, but not let it slide off the needle. Then we're going to knit in the stitch below. So we'll place our needle into the stitch below. Now when you do that, just check that you're not catching the float on the other side. So not sure if you can see that well, but here's my float below the needle, so I haven't caught the float. So we'll knit that, and then we'll purl the stitch on our needle, and then we'll let it slide off. Then we'll work in pattern to the end. So this is our 2-stitch increase right here. Okay, now we'll turn and work back, and because we've done a 2-stitch increase, we can keep the pattern on the wrong side row the same. So increases will always occur on the right side rows. So we've got to our increases here. So we just keep going in pattern. Purl one, slip one purlwise, purl one, slip one purlwise, and we'll keep going across the row. So after completing a wrong side row, you can see our increase sitting there. Your pattern will instruct you when to do the increases, but I'm going to meet you back here just before my next increase so that I can show you how to count your rows. So I'm up to my next increase now, and I'm doing neckline increases in my size more frequently than armhole increases. I know that this is my neckline edge because the shoulder is higher at the neckline than it is at the armhole. So I just need to check that I've done the right number of rows. I need to do neckline increases every 6 rows, and so I should have worked 5 rows already. Now to work that out, what we're going to do is just count the number of V's or knit stitches from our increase. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then sometimes it can be a little bit hard to see, but there's our 5th V there. It just tends to tuck itself under the stitch. So I've knitted 5 rows, my next increase is ready to go, and this time we're going to again work 6 stitches, and then this purl stitch here is the stitch we'll be doing our increase in, just like before. I'm going to finish doing my neckline increases and I'll see you back here. So I've worked all my neck increases, which is this side here. I haven't completed all my armhole increases yet. I'm just going to work 3 rows, which is specified by the pattern, ending with a wrong side row, and then I'll break the yarn. If you have any armhole increases to work over those 3 rows, then just continue to do so as required. So we've worked our extra 3 rows, and we're just going to cut the yarn, leaving about 15 centimeters or 6 inches that we can use to weave in later. And I'm just going to put these stitches on hold, and then we will start our right front. So we're now doing our Turkish cast on for the right front. We've got our slip knot on the lower needle, and I need 23 stitches for my size, so I'm going to wrap the yarn around the needles 23 times. We're going to start by bringing the yarn around the back and over the front. Okay, so like before, I'm going to pull out the lower needle so that the lower stitches remain on the cable. Unlike the left front, our first row is not a short row. We're going to work our way across the entire row because our short rows are done from the neckline edge, which is now on this side. So we'll be working short rows back and forth from this end. And for the right shoulder, the short rows, the turns are made on the wrong side row. So for our first short row, we're going to slip 1 purlwise. It's our selvage stitch. And then we're going to purl 1. Slip 1 purlwise with the yarn in front, and then purl 1 again. Now we're going to turn our work. There are 4 stitches on our right hand needle. We're going to create our double stitch now, and to do that we need to bring the yarn through to the front. So we'll bring the yarn through to the front. Then we'll slip the stitch onto our right hand needle and pull so that we've got the leg from the stitch below over the needle. Now we're going to pattern our way back, and we'll be starting with a purl stitch. So we'll bring our yarn through between the needles to the front, purl, knit, and then we're working the last stitch, which is a knit stitch because it's a right side row. Okay, that's our first short row. Now we'll do our second short row for the right front. Going to slip the first stitch purlwise, then we're going to purl 1, slip 1 forward, and now we're at our double stitch, so we're going to purl our double stitch, bringing our needle below both legs. Let's get a closer look at that. So we're going to purl, work both of those legs like so. Then we're going to slip 1 purlwise, purl 1, slip 1 purlwise, and purl 1. Now we're going to turn our work, bring our yarn through to the front, create our double stitch, we'll slip it onto our right hand needle and pull both of those legs over. Bring our yarn back through to the front because we're working in pattern and our next stitch is a purl stitch. So we'll purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit right to the last stitch and then knit the last stitch. Okay, so repeat those last 2 rows the specified number of times. And then, as with the right front, you'll start working shorter rows. Okay, so I've done my last short row. You can see the turn here. We're just going to turn it around. That's what it looks like on the back. And we'll work our way down the row, picking up the last double stitch. So we're purling our last double stitch, purling both of those legs, slip one, purl one, and then purl the last stitch. Okay, turn our work. Now our next row is going to be our increase row. Increases occur just as they did previously, but this time the neckline edge is on the left hand side of my work when I'm looking at a right side row, and all of the increases will occur on right side rows again. And then, as with our left front, we just keep working in pattern on the wrong side, and the instructions tell you which rows to do the neckline and armhole increases, which is exactly the same as the left front. I'll see you at the end of our neckline increases. I've just completed the right front. I've finished my neckline increases and just worked the extra rows as specified in the pattern. And I've put my left front onto the circular needle behind the right front. You can see my working yarn is at this end, and so we're going to work our way across the row and join the front in the middle. So it's a right side row, so we're just going to work it as we normally would until we get to the last stitch of the right front here. So we've got to our last stitch now, and we're just going to purl our last stitch together with the first stitch of the left front, like so. And then we'll continue working knit one, purl one along the row until we get to the end. If there are any armhole increases that are required on this row, just do those as normal. And we work our last stitch as a knit stitch on the selvage. So we've now joined our 2 fronts together. Continue to do the armhole increases as specified in the pattern, and working the wrong side rows as per normal. I'll see you back here once I've finished the armhole increases. So I've finished my increases and continued working in pattern up to the distance required. When I'm measuring from the outside of the shoulder here, and I'm just going to measure down this knit column here. So just placing my ruler against the side like so. So I've now ready to come back and start at the shoulders again, and we'll work the back, and then we'll join the front and back together. Now what's important is that you actually finish with a right side row, because what that means is when it comes to joining, you'll be working from the wrong side, and the reason we do that is it visually tells us whether we are slipping the correct stitch or not. It's just so much easier working working from this side when you're working in the round. So let's go and pick up the stitches on our shoulder. So we're going to pick up our stitches on the shoulders, but first we need to create some stitches that go across the neckline. Now I like to use a provisional method and then come back and do the cast off later. The reason being is I wanted to have a bind off that was reasonably tight, so there's not a lot of elasticity across the back of the neck, and that just helps to keep the shape of the shoulder nicely. So I've cast on the correct number of stitches and worked 4 rows of stocking stitch, so knit the right side and purl the wrong side rows. And then I'm just going to work knit 1, purl 1 across the row. So I'll do that now, and then we'll pick up the stitches. So here's our setup row completed in the appropriate yarn for our neckline stitches. We just need to turn it around so that the wrong side is now facing. And I've got my fronts here again with the wrong side facing. So what we're going to do is place these shoulder stitches on this side of the needle and these shoulder stitches on this side of our circular needle. Okay, here's our slip knot, so we'll just undo that by pulling the yarn, and I also need to check that there isn't a slip knot here, which there is. So when it comes to working this, I need to remember to undo. You can see that slip knot there, so I'll undo that on our way back. So I've picked up my stitches from the Turkish cast on. I've removed both of the slip knots because they didn't count as stitches, and I've got the wrong side facing. We're going to start just by working a wrong side pattern row across the entire row before we start our short row shaping. I'm going to be using a straight needle together with my circular needle, but you can of course just use the other end of your circular needle. I just want to keep my knitting flat for the purposes of the video. So we're going to purl the first stitch rather than slipping it just for this row. Then purl 1, slip 1 purlwise across the entire row. Last 2 stitches, purl, and then again purl the last stitch. Now we're going to turn our work. From here on in we'll be working short rows, so we're going to work our way across the back until we get to this point here, and then we'll do a turn. We'll work our way back to this point, then we'll do another turn, and then our short rows will get longer and longer until eventually we'll get to the end. Start by slipping the first stitch again because it's a selvage stitch, and then work across starting with a knit 1, purl 1 until you have the correct number of stitches on your right hand needle. So I've got the correct number of stitches, which for my size is 59 on the right hand needle, finishing with a purl stitch. We're now going to turn our work because this is where our first short row turns. So we'll bring our yarn between the needles through to the front. We'll slip this stitch purlwise onto the right hand needle and pull the leg from the stitch below over the needle by bringing our yarn back over the needle and pulling it tight. Now we're going to work our way back. The first stitch is a purl stitch, so we'll bring our yarn back between the needles through to the front again and work our way back in pattern as a wrong side row. So purl 1, slip 1 purlwise, purl 1, slip 1 purlwise. In your pattern, it will tell you how many stitches you need to work after the double stitch. So I've knitted the correct number of stitches. I'm now going to do a turn. So we'll turn our work so that the right side is facing, and we'll do our double stitch. Bring the yarn through the needles to the front, slip the stitch purlwise, and then pull the leg from the stitch below over the needle, bringing the yarn round to the back, and then we're going to work back in pattern. Our first stitch is a purl stitch, so we bring the yarn between the needles through to the front and work back in pattern on this right side row. Purl 1, knit 1. So that's the way we do our short row shaping, and I'll meet you back here after we've completed all of our short rows. So we've finished our shoulder shaping, and this is what it looks like ending with the wrong side row. Our next row is going to be an increase row, and we're going to increase at the armhole edges on each end. It's exactly the same as the armhole increases on the front. So we'll turn our work around. So first stitch is a selvage stitch, we'll slip it purlwise, then we're going to work another 5 stitches. So we've got 6 stitches on our right hand needle. Now we're going to do an increase in the next purl stitch. So we're going to purl it but leave the stitch on the needle, bring the yarn through to the back between the needles, knit in the stitch below, bring the loop through but not drop the stitch off our left hand needle, bring the yarn through to the middle and purl. Then we'll continue down the row. So it's just like the increases on the front. We'll work our way down to the other end where we'll be doing our increase again in the 7th stitch from the end. So work until you've got 7 stitches on your left hand needle. So we've got 7 stitches remaining on our needle. We're going to work our increase by purling into the stitch but not dropping it. We'll bring the yarn through to the back and then we'll knit into the stitch below. Bring the yarn back through to the front and just purl the stitch on our needle again, and then we'll drop it off the left hand needle and we'll work to the end in pattern. And there you can see our increase here. So we'll continue knitting our armhole increases, and when we've reached the same length as the front, I'll see you back here for joining in the round. So I've finished knitting my back now. It's the same length as the front on the other side. What I'm going to do is just put all of the stitches back on a needle, which I've done here. So my front stitches are now back on a working needle and my back stitches are ready to go. We're going to start with a wrong side row, and this is really important because it's so much easier to knit if you can see that you are slipping the correct stitch. So from here on down, it's all wrong side facing. So to join in the round, we'll need one stitch marker. We're going to start off by slipping the first stitch purlwise. Just get my new yarn. And then we'll place the marker because this is where the beginning of our round will be. Then we're going to work in pattern across the back, starting with a purl stitch, and it's our wrong side row, so it was going to be the row where we're slipping every second stitch. So purl one, slip one purlwise, purl one, slip one purlwise, purl one, and we'll keep working in pattern until we get to the last stitch. So we've got one stitch remaining on our back, and these are our front stitches. So we're going to knit the last back stitch as a purl stitch, and we're going to work it together with the first stitch of the front stitch. So we'll purl that together, and then we'll continue in pattern starting with a purl stitch. So purl one, slip one purlwise, purl one, slip one purlwise. And we'll be working through to the last stitch on our front. We've got one stitch remaining on our front, and we're going to work that as a purl stitch together with the first stitch that was on our back. So now we've joined in the round. Got a couple of loose ends to weave in later. We've joined in the round. Now we're going to start working our pattern in the round. To do that, we're going to start off with what was our right side row, but it's going to be worked from the wrong side. So we slip our marker, and then starting with a purl stitch, go purl one, knit one, purl one, knit one. And what you can see is that the knit stitches are formed where our slit stitch column is. So the knit stitch sits just above the float. I'll work all the way around in that pattern, and then we'll have a look at the second row. So we're finishing off the round with a knit stitch. And then for our next round, we're back to a row with alternate slip stitches. We're going to slip our marker, purl the first stitch, slip the next stitch, purl, slip, purl, slip. I'll see you back at the end of the round. So I'll keep working these two rows in pattern, working in the round. I'll work until I get to the desired length as stated in the pattern, and then we'll just be continuing to work in the round but on smaller needles. That just helps to stop the bottom of the garment from flaring out. After that we'll be ready for bind off. So I'll see you back here once I've worked the lower front and back. So I've finished working my lower front and back, and I am ready to do the bind off. I've been working the last rows on the smaller needle, and I'll use the smaller needle for the bind off. Our last row was a slip stitch row, so that was round 2. So we're going to be binding off working around 1. Remove our marker. So our last stitch was a slip stitch, so our first stitch in this round is going to be a purl stitch, so this is round 2. So we're going to purl 1 and then work a second stitch, which will be a knit stitch, and then we'll bind off our stitch by passing the second stitch over the first stitch, like so. And I'm just gently holding the yarn here to keep the first stitch on the needle. Then work another stitch. Now, as you can see, this needs to be a purl stitch because it's a purl column. So we'll purl 1, hold on to our yarn and pass the second stitch over, like so. Bring the yarn round to the back. This column is our knit column. So knit the stitch, pass the stitch over, yarn to the front, purl the stitch, pass the stitch over, yarn to the back, knit the stitch, pass the stitch over. We'll work our way all around the round until we get to the end. So we've just got our last stitch to work now, which is a knit stitch, pass the second stitch over. Then we're just going to cut our yarn, leave about 15 centimetres or 6 inches just to weave in. And then we'll just bring that yarn through the stitch, like so, and then pull it tight. I like to use a chenille needle for weaving in my ends, so that it's got a large eye, which is really handy, but it's got a sharp point. And I'm using a sharp point because I want to weave in the ends in a way that doesn't look obvious on either side. So just thread the wool onto my needle. Now I'm actually going to use the blunt end just to join the end of our row to the beginning of the row. And I'm just going to pass the needle under the 2 legs of that stitch, like so. And then I'm just going to pass the needle back where the yarn came from, so back through the last stitch of our bind off. And you can see how that looks really seamless there. Now to tie off the end, what I'm going to do is just create a little half knot, and I'm going to do that in this purl column because it will just look like an additional little purl bump. So I'm just going to pass my needle through one of these purl bumps here, and then just wrap it around once around the needle like so. Hold on to the wrap and then just pull the needle through nice and tight. You can see that's created a little half knot there. And then I'm going to use the sharp point of my needle just to thread. So I'm splitting the fibres here of the stitches. Now this isn't what you'd normally do if you had a right side and a wrong side, but because this is reversible, I really want to hide our woven ends. So I'm just going to thread it up, splitting the fibres of those stitches, and I'll just check on the other side that it doesn't look too obvious, which it doesn't. Pull the yarn up. Like so. And then I think I'll just head back down here for a couple of stitches before cutting it off. Again, just checking it's not obvious on the other side. Like so. Then we'll just cut our tail, being careful not to cut the stitch. And you can see how invisible that looks in terms of the weaving in of the ends. So that's how I weave my ends in. Now we're ready to sort out our neckline. What we are aiming for is a nice neckline that looks like this, and you can see that along the top of the neckline we've got what appear to be some nice chain stitches, and it looks very seamless on both sides, so there's no purl side row, which is the appearance you would get if you did something such as a long tail cast on. The other thing about this neckline is it's not very elastic, so that just helps to keep the shape of the neckline really nicely. What we're going to do is remove our long tail, our provisional knitting, but first we need to pick up the stitches. Now with this type of provisional cast on, what you notice is the stitches that we'll be picking up are stitches that are formed with loops that run between columns of stitches. So here's a column of stitches here, here's another column of stitches here, and you can see that between these columns there's a little loop. What it does mean is that at the ends, here's our stitch here between the first and second column of stitches, but we end up with like a half stitch at the very end. So the first thing we're going to do is just bring this loop right through to the edge of the neckline here. So I'm just going to pull that through like so, and that way I've got a completed stitch at this end. And just do the same at the other end if it appears the same, but in fact I think I've already done that because that looks nice and completed. Okay, now we're going to just pick up our stitches. I'll just zoom a little closer for that if we can. It's nice to have a smooth yarn such as cotton. It just helps with removing the cotton later. I find it easiest from this side, and just picking up the stitch going from bottom to top like so. I'm just going to work my way along the row, just picking up each of the stitches, and then just picking up that last one that we created before. Now what we're going to do is just remove our provisional cast on. You can cut your yarn, otherwise you can also just do what I'm doing, which is just unthreading. Whoops, Just pulling out the stitches by unweaving it, as it were. If you do decide to cut your yarn, I would cut it along this side here, just being careful not to go through your stitches, and then you just pick out the bits of yarn like so. You can see I've actually threaded a piece of my yarn onto the needle there, so cut that. So now we're just going to turn our work around. You can do this from either side. I just noticed that this stitch needs to be put on the right way so that the leg closest to the right is at the front of the needle. So we'll just swap that round. Okay, now we're just going to bind these stitches off, and we're going to do that just by slipping 2 stitches onto the right hand needle and passing the second stitch over the first stitch. So that's 1 stitch bound off. Then we'll just slip another stitch onto our needle, repeat that process. Second stitch bound off. We'll just go along the row like so. So that's our last stitch bound off. We're just going to pull the tail of the yarn through that last stitch, like so, and just pull that nice and tight, and then we'll weave the end of that yarn in and just secure each end to the neckline so this stitch doesn't gape. See, I've just brought the tail of the yarn through the neckline, and then we'll go back through the last stitch on our bind off again and weave our tail in as we did before. Then coming back to this end again, I'm just going to pull this tail nice and tight, tie it off and weave it in. When it comes to blocking your garment, I soak my garment in water, tepid water, for at least 20 minutes using a rinseless wool detergent. Then I lay it on a dry towel, roll up the towel and just gently squeeze out the excess water so the towel becomes saturated with the water from the garment. I use foam mats that I've pieced together and create a measurement frame using the measurements from the schematic to work out where my garment needs to be placed. So I calculate the height of the garment and the width of the garment and just use masking tape to draw a frame that my garment will sit on. I also just mark out the depth of the arm side, and it just helps me with knowing where to pin the garment. Then I just use blocking wires for seams to keep a nice straight edge. I actually just make sure the bottom of the garment is not quite as wide, just to help stop flaring the hem out. Once the top feels dry, I turn it over and just let the bottom dry as well.